that what you're doing now? Is that what you two are doing, running around out there? I'm not jealous. I work for this. I don't work for you to be going out every night. What do you want? Sit down. I'm not through with you.
Violence against women is endemic to our society. But these two police officers are likely to be confronted by a man who doesn't feel he's done anything wrong, who dismisses his violence with an excuse. Excuses that many of us buy into.
If she would just do her fair share, I wouldn't blow up.
She lied. I didn't do it.
I'm only violent when I'm drinking, and I've stopped drinking.
These are themes of defense, excuses men use to abuse. And with me in studio is Dale Trimble. He's been working with men who abuse for over 15 years, and he's identified a number of excuses or themes of defense that men use to justify their violent behavior. Until we learn to recognize these justifications as what they are, excuses, the abuse will continue.
In this episode, we will discuss how anger is an indication of unmet needs. We will also talk about what specific strategies that you as men can use to make the best of your anger. What made you choose this area?
I assumed at the time that men's aggression, their misuse of anger, was related to the ways in which we teach men to be men in our culture and society. And that had been a concern of mine for a number of years. And so I feel like working with that problem is an excellent way to begin to address the ways that we socialize men, that we socialize boys, that we shame them into not crying, not having a right to their own vulnerability, a right to their own emotions. And few emotions are acceptable outside of anger and being tough, being cold.
Yeah, so that really leads to my next question. How is anger different in men? How do they tend to respond to conflicts?
I mean, to some degree, to answer that question can result in a bit of a stereotype. And I think there's a full range in both men and women of an expression of anger. Nonetheless, there are some trends, and I would say that in my experience, there's a tendency for women to conceal anger behind tears, and not to be, so that the anger is turned inward or it's displayed or shown through the crying, whereas actually that's a secondary emotion. The primary one is maybe tremendous anger. I think that women can be very cutting with words or social exclusion, and particularly that can be directed toward other girls or women. However, I think that one of the issues with men is that there may be a range of ways that men deal with anger. I certainly see some men that will withdraw. They'll shut down, they'll contain their anger, and if it comes out, it's in a passive-aggressive form, which might be contemptuous behaviors like eye-rolling or sarcastic tone of voice, hostile looks and words, but never physically aggressive, or maybe even not even yelling. And then we can see from that one part of an axis, from passive and withdrawing ways of dealing with the emotion of anger, more aggressive ways. In my work, I look at several forms of aggression. One is the obvious of physical aggression. There's also sexual aggression, all the way up to, from not taking no to an answer up to actual rape, psychological abuse, destruction of property or pets, economic abuse, controlling the money in the home, and even spiritual abuse, which is controlling the spiritual practice, the religion that their partner is allowed to participate in. So there's a full range of behaviors, and it really comes down to looking with entering into a partnership with the man that I'm there to help, so that we can examine together the details of how he responds. And I think there's something extremely important, which is to separate the feeling of anger from a behavior which may be aggressive behavior, and not to confuse those two. Anger at its core is a healthy emotion that's there to inform us that in some way our feelings, our needs, or rights are being ignored or not taken into account. However, that anger might be based on a sense of entitlement. Perhaps the man expects his wife to make dinner because he's going to work, but neglects to acknowledge that she also works, does more housework, takes care of the kids. So we see that an emotion of anger out of which he chooses to become aggressive in many of those different forms is really based on a sense of entitlement and a kind of, a sexism.
Often it could be expressed in the form of sarcastic comments or bitterness or a lot of negativity. So they might not see themselves as struggling with anger, but yet there might be a lot of anger inside.
Yes, that's right. True. And of course, as we all know now, that has tremendous kind of costs in terms of heart problems, stress levels, constant use of, or the body's constantly secreting when a person's angry a lot. Adrenaline and cortisol, there's a lot of muscle tension. There may be a variety of health problems and psychological problems as well related to depression, insomnia, high anxiety.
Right. If a man has prolonged anger, it really puts the body in a constant hyper-arousal, stress kind of mode?
Yeah, it's, triggering the fight or flight response. So there's no rarely is there immediate risk to that man's life such that he needs to fight back or run for his life. But when we perceive a risk that's of a psychological nature, even if it's self-produced due to expectations that are really based on how traditional roles, nonetheless, the body is still responding as if there is that saber-toothed tiger and it's a high-risk situation. The term anger management makes me angry.
Right.
And the reason for that is that anger management is recommended or even court-ordered for a variety of teens and adults, mostly men, occasionally women, for contexts that go all the way from bullying behaviors up to and including murder.
Is it kind of like just symptom management rather than looking at the roots of the anger, right? Putting a bandage on a person's wound rather than finding ways to heal the wounds.
That's exactly right. And the thing is that it also implies that aggressive behavior is something that's automatic rather than behavior that's a choice. And I look at the choices that men make, even when they may tell me, I lost it, I flipped out, she pushes my buttons. I said, where was the box of Kleenex before you threw it? He said, well, it was on the counter. And he's looking at me a little bit like, why are you asking these kind of questions? I said, what else was on the counter? He said, oh, there were a couple of bowls, there was a knife block with knives in it. And I said, well, why didn't you throw the bowls or even throw a knife at your wife? And he said, I didn't want to hurt her. And at that moment, it's like a light went on, and he realized that actually he made a choice. He made that choice quickly, but he made a choice to throw something that he believed would not hurt her. So it wasn't that he lost control. He was actually, although quite angry, making a controlled choice. How you were feeling inside before you grabbed that Kleenex box and threw it at her? And he said, I was feeling powerless. I said, what were you needing? He said, I needed her to listen. So what you're telling me is out of the feeling of powerlessness and needing her to listen, you chose to throw a Kleenex box. And I said, what were you intending? He said, I wanted her to stop. I wanted her to shut up. And he didn't say that shut up in an aggressive way. He was really deeply acknowledging, not just to me, but first of all to himself. He was understanding and seeing that his intent was understandable, not okay. Yeah. But he was making sense that actually he was in control. He told himself a story, as we generally do with the way we use language. But then, in fact, from that, he was able to begin to make changes and stay safe. And also, when men confront what they've done in the detailed kind of way, the shame, which is most cases is there, it can be put to good work because at their core, the great majority of men I work with have the same values that they want to live their life from, like any other man or woman. Values of respect and kindness and listening and about communication.
Being able to encourage or help the men get in touch with their more vulnerable feelings or emotions, right? Yes. Because like you said earlier, a lot of the time, it's so much easier to express feelings of words or behaviors of anger, and yet deep down, often is a sense of powerlessness or a hurt, or sometimes even being abandoned or helplessness, all those things. Yes. But yet, I guess at that moment, he wasn't able to tell her that, I need you to really listen to me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So then, how can men get in touch with that side of them in a way that's sort of more accessible for them, or safer or easier for them?
Well, I think that's the value of coming to a counselor or a therapist, whether that's individually or in a group program, and that often the tensest times of the groups that we used to lead, which were 16-week groups, generally anywhere from 8 to maybe 14 men, pretty tense in the first evening, and by the end of the evening, the men were saying, I realize I can learn a lot here. I feel better about having come. I feel even sometimes, even on that first night, saying I feel proud of myself that I'm facing this. and I can see that I'm going to get some help. And I think one of the key things with challenges that men face in dealing with anger is that men are isolated emotionally.
Yes.
And isolated socially. What we know from at least one of the studies indicates that women are 6 times the risk of physical violence when they leave their relationship. And I'm clear that the reason for that is that it seems ironic, but the man's response to their partner leaving, frequently due to many of the behaviors we've talked about, is, well, one way I have of saying it is that he's put all of his eggs in one basket,
right,
and she is that basket, and so she's leaving. And
so he's even more desperate
that's
to
right.
keep her.
To control her, to keep her, to insist, to threaten, and to escalate. The deeper reason is the fear of abandonment, the tremendous fear of isolation. And so men tend not to reach out to friends, even to go to a doctor as often as they should, to seek the kind of help that can really, truly make a difference.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the kinds of things that a man who's, say, might be listening to this program now could benefit from, is reaching out in their community to connect with a counselor and get some help before it's too late.
A lot of times men are, like you said, a lot more isolated. Actually, their partner or wife, usually the only source of emotional support.
That's so true.
And yet, women are dying to hear those vulnerable words coming from a man. It's like music to their ears.
Yeah. Yes.
What else can help men in terms of anger besides being in touch with more vulnerable emotions?
A psychologist by the name of Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote a book and runs programs entitled Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Compassion, I think is the full title of the book. And one of the things he said, I've done a couple of trainings with him myself, something he said that's always stayed with me, and I often use it in therapy sessions and explore it, is he said, anger is always about unmet needs. So I often will say that in the early part of the first session with a man who's come to me and say, so if that was true for you, in this moment that you've told me about, when you were aggressive in the way you described, what were you needing? That is a powerful question. The other thing that's done in the both individual or group counseling sessions is the use of one form of anger management or emotional intelligence training, and that's called an anger journal or an anger diary, in which a man will write down and separate and distinguish between what is a cue, in other words, what is it that his partner said or did that he responded to, what were his sensations in his body, so it's increasing mindfulness of what's happening inside, what did he say to himself about what she said or did, which is what we call the talk up. And that might be, first of all, it's what he says internally, something like, she doesn't have a right to talk to me like that after everything I do for her. So this is the ways of escalating the anger, which are about blame and not about responsibility. And the last column in an anger journal would be talk down. So what can you say to yourself that's true, that's real, that would increase your ability to make choices that you feel good about? So it might be as simple as, I realize I'm angry. I don't want to scare her or push her away from me. I know I'm angry. I need to take a time out, go for a walk. I realize I'm angry. What am I really needing right now? The other thing that a technique that's often taught in many of the courses or individual sessions is what's called a timeout, but there are specific rules about a timeout. I even have a wallet-sized business card that's called the timeout procedure, and where a man would follow the script, which is, I'm angry, I'm going to take a timeout, and he says this out loud. Then he goes away, ideally for up to an hour, and during that time doesn't focus on the argument, because he doesn't want, it's not okay to be escalating your thinking by going over it and getting angrier when you're away from the person. Maybe do things like, going for a walk, doing something to use up the physical energy of the anger. And the key thing is that anger, taking time out, doesn't solve the problem, but it's a way of taking responsibility for what you're doing at the time and reducing the risk of choosing aggression over choosing a nonviolent way to express feelings and needs and to listen to his partner.
I read about sort of how when we're angry, sort of the fight-flight response in our brain is being activated, like kind of like the limbic system.
Yes.
So at that time, our thinking brain is not working. So when someone's really upset and in the heat of the moment, and he's not going to remember what you said here, what is something very quick that or easy that he could remember?
What I will recommend is a timeout, and that either person can say they want a timeout, and I'll actually even encourage him to practice that which I describe as just like if you're an actor in a play or a movie, you would practice your lines.
Yeah.
You would practice saying them out loud, and you would practice how you walk on stage and what your actions are. So I say, I'm going to encourage you to do something which sounds silly and embarrassing. And I'm going to encourage you to go home and practice taking a time out. So in other words, he would say, this is a practice time out, and say out loud, I'm angry, I'm going to take a time out. Then he goes, gets his coat, his keys, and his wallet, goes out the door and closes the door behind him without slamming it and without throwing any negative comments over his shoulder. So what he's developing is technically what we would call a kinesthetic memory, or a felt sense, so that his body can remember, his mouth and words and jaw can remember. What is it like to say this, to do this in response? That's laying down a sequence of behaviors. As the Canadian neuroscientist said, neurons that fire together, wire together.
Right.
And so he's developing a habit in that moment. And furthermore, I'm going to encourage her, because I'm curious as well, is how does he respond in that? How does she respond in those moments? If he's maybe even tried to take a time out before, some women might have said out of their own fear of abandonment, just going to be a quitter. You can never face your problems. What's wrong with you? Why don't you face it like a man? I'm just giving some examples.
Yes.
That's always the case. Or pleading with him to say, or being afraid of him leaving, which could be based upon that he's gone out before, gotten drunk and driven drunk. When he's left, gone and had an affair, a one-night stand. So she may have some anxieties that are based on a real history of what I would call also abusive behavior in the relationship. So those are some of the kinds of things that I would suggest in a practical way. And there's one other thing I wanted to talk about is some men will come in and say, well, she's violent with me too.
Yeah, that happens.
Yes. And the historical response, I'm embarrassed to say by myself and many others, and still happening, is, well, we're not here to talk about her. We're here to talk about you. You're the one, if it's a court-ordered situation, you're the one who's been convicted of assault, or I can only help you because I'm seeing you in the office, or maybe she's got some mental health problems. Have you asked her to see a doctor? All of those, unfortunately, and I'm embarrassed to say, are responses that some so-called professionals have engaged in. So the important thing is I want to find out what are the details. I want to understand his experience of how she responds to him. What are the words she says that he responds that hurt him the most? Or what are the words she says that he has an angry response to? And has she ever been aggressive to him?
Yeah.
Now, the context is profoundly important. Some studies that have been done, even very large studies, have indicated that women's violence is equal to men's violence. The problem is that a number of these studies don't take into account the context. In other words, is her aggression toward him a response to his aggression or his threats of aggression? So we don't know if it was defensive violence or not. That's not too often not asked. But the other very important aspect here in regard to a woman's use of violence in the relationship is that men can be hurt emotionally and even physically by aggression from their female partner. And in particular, I want to stress the emotional aspect of it. It can be very startling, frightening, have a high impact in his emotional body, on his sense of self, if she strikes him. And some women will respond aggressively during an argument, even if he's not been aggressive or threatened aggression, due to who they are, to their own history in previous relationships, or of their own growing up context. I think it's really important to explore that and to honor his experience of being shaken, feeling ashamed that she has hit him, and that to feel upset about that again falls into the area of, oh, come on, a woman hit you and you're going to cry about it? Give me a break. Be a man. Don't be a woman.
Yeah.
So I think that's an aspect that is too often not taken into account by therapists and is dismissed by the men themselves in their own experience.
Yeah, and it's a lot harder for men to admit to friends or even professionals, even the police, right, that they have been physically abused.
That's right.
So then in domestic violence, is it more about anger? Is it more about power and control? Or is it sort of all interconnected?
Well, I think it's all, as you said, it's interconnected. In the moment, responding with aggression or threats of aggression or other kinds of threats, we haven't even gone into a great deal into psychological abuse. In the moment, that can restore a sense of power. But that's power that's not real. That's power that's based on fear. It doesn't give men a better life. We know that men live shorter lives. They commit suicide at a much higher rate. and a number of other issues.
Yeah, and addictions and all those other things, right? Yeah. Right. What would you like to say to the men on the show tonight?
Mm-hmm. I would like to say, take a quiet moment with yourself to reflect on the truth of what you do. If you feel ashamed of your responses, even though a part of you has felt justified, and maybe you'll still be angry, that shame to me is a sign that there's a big part of you that says it's not okay to say what I've said, to do what I've done, because I can see the pain it's caused in the person who I used to love and may still, in fact, love very much. Mm-hmm. So take a moment to really deeply reflect upon the kind of life you want and whether or not you can take the courage really to face and live up to the kind of husband you'd like to be, the kind of partner that you'd like to be. Reach out to a counselor in your community. You could contact myself, and if I'm not able to see you or we're in different communities, then I'm happy to help connect you with someone in your community that could help you turn your life around and result in more dignity for you and more happiness for the people that you care about and still hope will care about and love you.
And that's very powerful. And I think that's the kind of, even going to that place might seem vulnerable, but yet that's the kind of power that lasts a long time, right?
That's
and
true.
You know, even if this marriage doesn't work out for you, you can use that, you know, as a father, as a son, as a future partner or a future husband. So it's a lifelong kind of transformation. You could see that in different areas of your life, and it can be quite liberating, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's a little quotation I'd like to read from a book. It's by a Buddhist quite well known, Thich Nhat Hanh.
Right.
And the book is entitled Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames. So it goes like this. If a mother is working in the kitchen and hears her baby crying, she puts down anything that she is holding and goes into the baby's room. Nothing is more urgent than the baby's cries. The first thing she does is pick up the baby and embrace the baby. Remember when you were a little child and you had a fever, and although they gave you aspirin and things like that, you didn't feel better until your mother came and she put her hand on your burning forehead. That felt so good. Her hand was like the hand of a goddess. A lot of freshness, a lot of love and compassion penetrated into your body just because you were touched by the hand of your mother. That hand of your mother is your hand. That energy is still alive in your hand. If you know how to breathe in and out, to be mindful, then touching your forehead with your very hand, you can see that your mother's hand is still alive. You will have the same kind of energy of love and tenderness for yourself.